The classroom for the CE 4803 Infrastructure Management IT Applications. So this is a class, I think, in conjunction with the UTC, the seminar kind of combined together. So today we get a chance to invite an expert for independently graduate professors and master's degrees. So first of all, I think let me introduce the UTC Center Director, Mike Hunter. Mike Hunter is the Center Director here. This is handling the lab education. I'd let him introduce a little bit, and there I'm going to introduce.
I'll be very, very quick, I promise. I just want to do a quick introduction. This is the first UTC seminar this semester. We are really excited. We have a fantastic speaker. Mr. Butch, Wlaschin, I'm even close, I apologize if I got that wrong. He's going to be talking about, as you can see, transportation asset management beyond MAP 21. Butch is a director of FHWA Office of Asset Management and Payments since 2007. Prior to that, he was a director and chief engineer for FHWA Federal Lands Highway Program from 1997 to 2007. You have 42 years at FHWA. Graduated from Georgia Tech in 1976. You figured out where I was in my education at that point in time. We won't bring that up. He ultimately holds an MS in geotechnical engineering from Georgia Tech and also a BS from our university. Leads a team of engineers and transportation specialists developing policy guidance and technical assistance. I actually had the opportunity today to meet with Butch for about 30 minutes, then we had lunch. And it is fantastic, the amount of different things he was bringing up. And I was learning just in those 30 minutes. I'm looking forward to this. There's a high bar now after that meeting, so this is going to be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me here to Georgia Tech. As I commented, Mike said that I actually came here in 1975 and got my master's degree from George Sowers. So for at least the last 25 of the last 40 plus years, I said that I was always in geotech, and I came from Georgia Tech. So I got to do lots of different things around the country, both within the federal government and outside. I've worked on projects in all 50 states. If you've been on the Blue Ridge Parkway and seen the Linco Viaduct, that really fancy bridge that Chevy likes to use in their commercials, I did the foundations for that, and they were originally looking at building a tunnel up there, and we did some drilling on the side of that mountain, and I took 60 and 70 foot long pieces of core out of the rock, and then had a specialist tell me that I was just drilling in a boulder. So then I had to go back up there. When I did the initial drilling, I used helicopters to fly all the equipment in. When I had to re-drill it because I didn't have any money in my budget, I hired a mule team out of Knoxville, Tennessee, and they drug the equipment up the side of the mountain so that I could then re-drill to prove the other gentleman wrong. And lo and behold, at about 85 to 90 feet, we broke out of the rock. And so my cores, as I brought them out of the soil, had moss on the bottom, which meant that one day they were up on top and they'd fallen over. So the Appalachians have done a lot in recent times, and to be able to do that as a geotech, to always be challenging, trying to do something different. When I had an opportunity, as I told Mike, I went to Alaska for 3 years. My first project up there, I was told that I would deal with a port that had a 25-foot tide. And other than in textbooks, I never thought that that was possible. But when you're standing on the bare rock one day and the next day it's under 20-some feet of water, it's quite a challenge to you to have to figure out, how do I handle the logistics of doing that? So most of my career has been with Federal Highway. I've gone from being a design engineer and a construction engineer to a geotech. Then I took a little bit of time and worked in the finance office. I'm not quite sure, that's about the time my kids decided they didn't want to be engineers, thinking if you're going to do finance, that's not much fun. Because we like being on construction equipment. So they all decided they wanted to go into the military or something to get away from engineering. But so I went in and I was one of the crafters of the U.S. Department of Transportation's accounting system. And you'd say, how would you ever do that? It's because when you get into the field, you have to learn to deal with the budget. You have to develop the budget, figure out how to spend and work within that budget. and that makes you sort of cost conscious. And the new terms that everybody wants to use is about transparency. So I tried to make whatever I was doing transparent. If I had to go drill a bridge, or if I had to work on a section of roadway, I wanted to make sure all the numbers were lined up. So I got to do that. And I sat in rooms with 10 or 15 people from other federal agencies who all claimed that they were from the Wharton School of Business or Harvard or Yale, and they hated engineers. So for a long time I sat on my hands, and I wouldn't tell them that I was from Georgia Tech or that I had a degree in engineering. I sort of remained silent. But the theme of the department's accounting system has my hand all over it. I should have learned how to do an IT thing. And so if you go into the department's accounting system and you hit Control W, it ought to flash and say, Butch had something to do with this software program. So word to the wise for you guys doing that. What I'm going to talk a little bit about today is transportation asset management. 1997, 1999, we started talking about it, but it was an initiative, as you'll see in the slides, and it really didn't go anywhere. As a designer, I designed projects. I then ultimately went out in the field. I saw those projects built, we cut the ribbon, and then I forgot about it. I never wanted to do a final inspection report. I never wanted to complete all the paperwork and send it to the owner. All I wanted to do was go to the next project. I never once thought about what happens tomorrow, because that's what we did. We were designers, builders. We designed it, built it, moved on to the next project. Always worrying about expansion, more capacity. So by the mid to late 90s, owners were coming back to me and saying, you know, you built this, now how do we take care of it? You just finished this bridge, and they would make references to the car or a house and say, what's the plan? Do we need to do anything with this bridge or this section of the roadway for the next 5 or 10 years? And I'd often say, it starts today. You need to be doing these things. I met with state bridge engineers across the country. I get a chuckle out of them, but I can suggest to them that the day after they open the bridge, they probably need to wash it down. And I've had them say, wash the bridge down, why would I do that? Back in the mid-70s, my father was a deputy public works director, state of Nebraska, oops, I shouldn't say that, but the state of Nebraska, building a new concrete bridge. That first winter, they put enough salt out there you could have made ice cream on top of that concrete bridge. And I was home for the holiday and I said, Dad, I see all that salt out of the bridge. That's not really good for concrete. It's going to corrode it, it's going to shorten the life of that bridge. You planned on it to be here for 50, 60, 70 years. You've already cut 5 years out of the life. So they went out with street sweepers and brooms and they cleaned all of the salt off of the bridge. I'm guessing about half of it went in the stream because there wasn't any fish there for quite some time thereafter. But they never put salt on the bridge anymore. It would ice up in the wintertime, but he keeps saying, well, Butch told me, don't put salt on the bridge. So he needed to find a different way. Sand works pretty good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that whole life piece of the puzzle. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this asset management thing that's fairly new, but I think as a civil and environmental specialist, I think that it's really key today for how state highway departments are going to manage their assets. We're going to talk a little about how we're doing it. One of my favorite topics, and that Mike can relate to, is the piece about asset management and adaptation and how that fits in. And then a little bit about infrastructure performance, because Congress, in their wise way, has decided that we need to measure performance of the nation's highway system. And as they give us money or state money, they're going to say, how is it performing and can you relate to that? And then a few closing remarks. So what are we talking about when it comes to asset management? It's sort of unbelievable, but here in the United States, we have 6 million kilometers, or roughly 4 million miles, of roads in the United States. There are 603,000 bridges. What's really surprising is that most people just think that that's all owned and operated by the 50 DOTs. But actually there are more than 3,000 counties that own roads and bridges. There are more than 26,000 individual owners. So sometimes a small community owns it, sometimes it's a tollway, sometimes the tollway is separate from the state DOT, sometimes they report to the secretary. Federal lands people are out there, the Park Service has bridges, the military base has roads and bridges out there, tribal governments have roads and bridges, lots of people have roads and bridges. There's no common standard of how you build them, or how you measure them, or how you monitor performance. There's none of that. Because you can figure if I can't get the 50 state DOTs to agree to something, it's gonna be pretty hard to figure out how to get 26,000 of them all together at the same time. Typically, the system is more than 100 years old. I'm not, but most of the system is. Highway system, the interstate system, more than 50 years old. When Eisenhower and company said, you know, in 1956, we're gonna start building this interconnected system of defense highways from coast to coast. As a young lieutenant in the Army, he had tried to drive cross-country on what is now called the Lincoln Highway, and he struggled going from Ohio all the way out to California. There was no system of doing that, and he'd seen roads in Europe, the Autobahn and others, where they could drive from side to side of the entire country in very rapid time, and he brought that to the United States, tried repeatedly to get it through, and ultimately as president said, let's build this nation's highway system. So, bridges that we have in the United States, on average, we design them to be 50 years old. On average, they're about 48 years old today. And we have bridges that are 150, 200 years old. Sometimes they make the paper as being structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, but if it was a bad bridge, the state DOT or the local government would close it. So even though the press likes to sensationalize things like structurally efficient or functionally obsolete, the state would never allow a bridge to be open that would be unsafe. So believe me, as you're driving across the country, if a bridge is open, reasonably it's safe. You know, if it gets hit by a train or gets hit by a truck and it falls down, that wasn't the bridge's problem. Focus on building and expansion. That's what we've been doing for years and years and years. Money for that capital expansion came primarily from the federal government, starting way back with federal aid acts like in 1916, and moving forward, there was always this need to want to be able to help the United States, our economy, quality of life, maybe not in the early days global competitiveness, but we've always thought about we need to be able to get goods from farm to market, or maybe get supplies and activities from the mid-Atlantic states to the coast, or get down to the Gulf, or wherever. So we were always doing that, but in every one of those federal aid highway acts, maintenance and operation was a state and local responsibility. The federal government would pay upwards of 90% of every dollar spent on the interstate, but once it was built, it was a state responsibility. So you can start to see that there's sort of the reversion of who's going to be taking responsibility. In the last 20 years or so, maybe a little longer, the value of the dollar we've seen is greatly diminished. What I used to be able to do for $1, $2, $3, $4 million doesn't even get me out on the job site today. Quite often, that's mobility, $4 or $5 million. So if I start building a bridge that we used to build that might be $100,000, we're probably spending $800,000 today. We're going to build some signature bridges, and those will cost lots more. But we're just getting less for everything. The cost of the materials, the cost of the labor, a lot of factors go into it. So $10 million doesn't really do me much good anymore if we're not talking in hundreds of millions of dollars when it comes to that. Certainly more volume. In recent times, maybe with the gas crisis, we saw some decrease in the volume. What we didn't see a decrease is in the truck volume. Truck volumes have gone up, and now they're pushing us time and time again to increase the weights on trucks. Right now we have an 80,000 pound limit, but we've got lots of proposals by Congress, state legislators, the industry in general saying, let's go to 97 or let's go to 106. Well, what is that going to do to that aging infrastructure that's out there? The last bullet I put up there, assume that it will always be there. I was on the plane the other day coming back from Iowa, and somebody said, you know, I never think about the highway. When I come out of the house in the morning, it's always there. Good idea. Probably when you flip the switch, the lights come on, or turn the faucet and the water comes on. It's always there. They have no idea how it gets done. It's just there. I mean, even my neighbors, although they occasionally come and ask if I can fill the potholes, but I don't do that either. When we started talking about asset management, roads and bridges, when I went to the state DOTs, were often not considered assets. I'm not sure what the asset was. They might have talked about the building. Sometimes they had a vehicle inventory. Sometimes they might have had equipment. But it was interesting that in the vast majority of state DOTs and local governments, when you talked about assets, it wasn't talking about roads and bridges. It was the same for me. I mean, I didn't really know where that was. Public utilities, water, and electricity, they're just there. I mean, I don't know where they come from. That was the idea. Maintenance was not required. I'm sure if I talk to the state of Georgia, the maintenance guy or gal will always say, first thing that gets cut is maintenance. I don't need maintenance. The road's brand new, it's gonna last for 50 years. I'm not gonna be here tomorrow, so it won't make any difference. It's gonna be good. So maintenance, state after state after state, that's the first thing that gets cut. What happens and why that happens is that you get that new bridge and you don't do anything for 25 years, must not need maintenance. If you did that with your car, you'd probably be parked by the curb right now, because you've got to do some things. So we apply things at home and in our daily life, but we don't do that in the highway arena. It's always been about expansion. An interesting footnote is about the design and construction is about 18 to 20% of the whole life cost. The state, the local government, the city, the community, your neighbors will do everything they can to make sure we have the money to build it the first time. And then what happens? Well, we got it built, it doesn't take any more money to make it last longer. That 18 to 20% is growing. Today, those extra costs are probably 50, 60, 70, 80% of a whole life. So as part of the asset management concept, it's trying to document what does it really take. You're gonna do a lot of planning, you're gonna decide to build a steel bridge or a concrete bridge, you'll do a life cycle cost analysis that we do it in school, try to figure out what's the best. But then we need to take that and document, what's it take after I build it? How do I document that on a daily basis or a monthly or annual basis? What is it gonna really cost for me to operate and own, maintain that bridge over the next 70 years? Again, repeating again, historically the focus has always been on building and expansion. That's what we've done. We've celebrated the completion of the interstate, but I get reports on probably every 6 months from state DOTs, and the interstate keeps expanding. Some days it shrinks, but most of the time it keeps expanding. So I'm not sure that we've completed it yet. We're still working on it. We just opened up a brand new section of Interstate 57, and I think another one on Interstate 69 is coming on board. So I guess when we say it's complete, it's basically complete, but we're still expanding the interstate. And then on top of that, we go from 2 lanes to 14 lanes, or however many it was on 85, 75 this morning. It's like, there was a lot, whatever. And we'll talk about that and how that comes about. The old plan was to plan it, design it, build it, rebuild it. I talked about that because if we went to rebuild it, we could call up Uncle Sam and say, hey, we need to rebuild this bridge, give me some money and we'll rebuild the bridge. That's not happening today. Now we're talking about planning it, designing it, building, maintaining. Let's keep it in good condition for as long as we can. And so one of the things that I've been using, and then one of those secretaries of transportation picked it up, is that I would like to keep good roads or good bridges in good condition for as long as I can. So now we have a state of good repair, or keeping good roads good as an initiative, but the idea was, let's do what we can. One of my cars is a 1995 Toyota Camry, 270-some thousand miles on it. Yeah, I change the oil every 3,000 or 4,000 miles. Mostly add oil, because I think it's leaking out. But I add oil to it. It runs really good. In fact, it runs better than my 2007 Camry. It gets better gas mileage than my 2007. But I've done a good job of taking care of it. That's what I need to do on these roads. Prior to 1999, the federal government and state DOTs really sort of probably considered asset management as probably my stock portfolio, and my comment is that probably is what I was working on. But by that time, we had decided that we need to be thinking about long-term, how to take care of the highways for long-term, be it a local government or state government. So AASHTO, and that's that organization of the 50 state highway departments, they created a planning subcommittee called Subcommittee on Asset Management. And then my office, or my agency, created the Office of Asset Management. And what was interesting is that the initial group of people in the Office of Asset Management were all economists. There were no engineers, there were no planners, there were no construction and maintenance people. There were financial planners whose goal was using the Government Accounting Standards Bulletin 34, which says, what's the value of your assets? And they went to the state DOTs and said, if you want more money, tell us the value of your assets. And so quite a few states tried to do that, but they really didn't add in roads and bridges. And when I went out and started talking to them, they invited me to a meeting in California one year, and I had a little bit of heads up time ahead of the meeting. I looked and I thought, everybody in this room is an economist, and I'm the only engineer, and I need to talk about asset management to these people. So I put a little bit of different spin, and we did talk about what is the value of their state highway system. You know, and it could be in terms of quality of life, and it could be in terms of what did it cost me to build it? Does it cost me to maintain it? Try to get them to think about all those things. Is there a straight line depreciation? How do you, you know, the bottom line is when it comes to the value of the interstate today, we could not rebuild it from scratch. We had a lot of rules and things in place back in the day. We took land, we had eminent domain, we built the interstate, but we couldn't do it today. It'd be horrendous trying to figure that out. Back in the day, 1999, Michigan was one of those leaders. They were always out front. The governor came in and created an asset management board. They have, if you want money from the state government to go to the county, you have to have an asset management program all the way down. That was 1999. There weren't 5 other states that even probably could spell asset management at the time. What my office does is we produce today guidance, technical assistance. We help states inventory their bridges and their pavements. We try to do that economic analysis part, and I think that's pretty important to do. But back in the day, we lacked strategic and systematic overview. We never thought about tomorrow unless it had to do with capacity. And then I put down a note about little discussion about a gap analysis, and even today in the legislation, we say you need to do a gap analysis. Most of the state people will say gap analysis. That's the difference between what would you like the road to be, what condition, and where is it today, and that's a gap. And then how do you address that gap? One way most states try to do is say we need more money so we can get up here. Maybe the solution is lower the level of service. Does every foot of the interstate need to be in perfect condition? Or can 97% of it be in good condition? What about 93% of the interstate be in really good condition? Where's that gap and how do we address it? 2003, more focus on identifying the assets. One of the things that I've often talked about in other forums is that the data collection that we see for the highway pavements varies from state to state. If we're doing it here in Georgia and then we go up to North and South Carolina, they both do it uniquely different. And a couple years ago, I did a study in Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. In Virginia, the state DOT looked at the pavement in every through lane of the interstate. So if it was 4 lanes wide, 2 in each direction, they looked at all 4 lanes, north and south. And they looked at it on a segment by segment basis, maybe 526 feet, and then they gave me an average for that. And I thought that was pretty good. And then I looked at Maryland's data. Maryland was sort of to the letter of the law. They only do it in the eastbound lane on the outside or the northbound lane. And they don't do it in both directions, and they don't do all the lanes. I thought, okay, well, that's a little different version. But then I noticed a whole segment of I-95 wasn't included, and I asked questions about the I-95, and they said, oh, that's a turnpike authority. We don't have authority to get their data, so they don't give it to us, and so we don't know what it does. That's part of the interstate. It's in Maryland. And then I went over to Delaware, and they said, well, we don't want any of that fancy equipment. We just drive the road a couple times a year, and we do an algorithm, and we say, well, it was sort of rough, so it has a roughness indicator of this, and it had so much rutting because we saw some water out there. That's how we decide how to spend the dollars state by state by state. One's doing it visually, one's doing it in 1 lane, one's doing everything. Multiply that times 50 states or all those other jurisdictions out there. We need to have a better way of collecting that data to be more uniform. It really boils down to a better system of collecting that data. Today, about 40 state DOTs do pavement management systems, collect all those inventories. Bridge management systems, you heard about that the other day. Safety management systems are out there as well. But few of them use it to make decisions. I've been out in Cheyenne, Wyoming, met with the state DOT. They had a room, maybe about this side, wall after wall after wall of databases from all the data they collected on all the highways in the state of Wyoming. And I said, well, how does it compare this year to last year? It was like, compare? What do we need to compare it for? You just asked us what it looked like this year. You didn't ask us over a trend for the last 5 years. They weren't using it for decisions. What they did is when the money came from Uncle Sam or from their legislator, they had 5 districts, each one of them got 20%. So if you go up in the northern part of Wyoming, the roads really look pretty good. They have paved shoulders, they have really nice signs, everything is really fancy. You go down along Interstate 80 and you're thinking, Jesus, what's wrong with this road? Because he only got a little bit of money and he's got all the traffic, he's got lots of things going on Interstate 80, but he didn't have the money. All the money went up north, or at least their fair share. So we needed to be able to say, use the data for decision. And so whether it was me or one of the other squeaky wheels in the office, we kept talking to congressional staffers saying, states aren't really managing effectively how to spend their dollars. There might be other things to do. So we started talking about asset management. 2005, we decided, here in the US, we're not doing too good on this asset management. So we took a bunch of state DOTs and we went overseas and we looked at Europe and Australia. They were doing asset management. They've been doing it for a long time. It's interesting to note that when I talk to those people in those countries, they'll tell you what afternoon in July 1985 they decided to do asset management. And that was the day that the government in those countries went broke. Same thing happened in Canada in 1996 or 97. They'll tell you that during this month, the government of Central Canada went broke. They didn't have money to take care of roads and bridges anymore. And just started going downhill rapidly. So they decided they needed to have a different approach. And you're going to slowly see that come to place here in the US. We found an international guide that was being done in Australia and New Zealand. Leave it to us up here, it's like, well, it's from down, the text is probably upside down. We don't know how to read it up here. So we had to create another one. 2007, we looked here in the United States. We did find 5 states that were doing things. Michigan, North Carolina, Utah, Oregon, Minnesota might have been another one. They were all trying to do something, trying to manage their assets. So for a little while, I thought, maybe it shouldn't be asset management. Maybe it should be, how do we manage our assets? Maybe change the whole context. It's managed assets. I'm taking care of what I have. We too developed a guide, trying to make it come out of there. We published a document in 2011, which is the AASHTO Guide for Implementation of Asset Management Plans. It tells the state in a guidebook format of how to collect the data, how to set targets in the data, how to manage the asset a little bit better than they have, basically trying to optimize that investment across the various dollars. So when it comes to asset management, the core piece is what I have up here. What is the current state of my assets? Really, what are those assets? The state needs to know, basically, what's the extent of the pavement? How many lanes wide is it? Maybe what are the characteristics of the pavement that are out there? When I was in Iowa a couple of weeks ago, we drove on a section of the interstate that the outside lane was asphalt over concrete. The middle lane was a full depth concrete, but it had an inlay of new concrete on top. And the third lane on the left-hand side was all asphalt. Which lane are they measuring on? What are they reporting to me when it comes back to my office? So they need to really figure out, what assets do they own? What condition are they in? And let's have some uniformity in how we report it. And then I say, what is that desired level of service? A state like Utah set the bar that all of the interstate will be 95, 97% in good condition. I asked them what is good, what's fair, what's poor, but basically they said good, as in really good. People will not ever complain, there's no patching, there's no cracks, the road is really open 24/7. And they said, we've been doing that for a long time since the Olympics and now we can't afford it. Would you mind if we come down to 82? I said, I didn't set the bar at 97 and I don't know what 82 represents. So, and the public won't understand that. So look and come up with some different ideas. So they said, well, how about if we say acceptable pavement and unacceptable pavement, and we'll say that 90% of the pavement on the interstate is in acceptable condition. So they're playing some semantics, they're changing it, but what's Nevada do? Nevada's not doing that. Nevada's saying, no, we're still good, fair, and poor. Maine, I like Maine, they said, well, we actually have roads in Maine that are good, fair, poor, and terrible. So I don't know what those are. Is that four-wheel drive or whatever? What's terrible? I define that one. Which ones, and I like the third one, what assets are critical for sustained performance? And most states will come right out and say, the interstate is critical for us. We need to be able to get people to and from their jobs. We need to get product to and from the port. The interstate probably is the most critical asset we have. We need to probably spend more money on the interstate than maybe a farm-to-market road. In the Utah case, and it's all right with them, they allow me to rattle on them a lot. But in Utah's case, when they lowered that 95, 97% acceptable down to about 88, they saved $30 million a year that they are now spending on their farm-to-market roads. They took it from maintaining a high level of comfort on the interstate, and they're now using $30 million more down here. Well, when your legislature meets and they can't come up with 30 million, you can say, well, I can move things around in my budget. And what that really is asset management at its best. They're using the data to drive decisions to be able to move money over to where they need to be doing that. So that's really the whole context of an asset management program. I would say it was a tough sell until this last July, a year ago, not this year, but past year. When Congress actually passes a law and says you will have an asset management program, then it makes my life a whole lot easier. Because then I can go out and say, we need to have an asset management plan, and for the most part, most states are buying into that, and as I mentioned earlier at lunchtime, there are still 5 states, but I will not name right now, but 5 states who are saying, in your ear, government, we ain't doing it, we're going to do it our way. Well, they actually will be penalized in the long run. Federal dollars will be taken away from them until they decide they want to do this program. So there is a gotcha thing. You need to have an asset management plan. So what is it? An asset management combines focus on metrics, long-term system sustainability. The way people are doing it is that they are suddenly putting all of this into the computer. They're looking at the data in a different way. They are using GIS platforms. They are looking at pavements and bridges and they call it roadside structures, like furniture, roadside furniture, like where are the light posts, where are the signs, where is the infrastructure and what is its condition? How soon does it wear out? A sign might be every 3 to 5 years, or maybe every 5 to 10, whatever it is in your state. Taking a long-term view of it with short-term targets. I want to make sure the road stays in a good condition. And I'm trying not to just go out there and fix the things that are starting to fail, but maintain the system as best I can from one end to the other. And that legislation that Congress came up with last year, they targeted some new things for us. And one of them was national goal, safety, that's always number one, but infrastructure condition. First time that it ever showed up in federal legislation. It's already been in Michigan's legislation, Utah, North Carolina, or Oregon, Washington State. It was always one of their top priorities within the state government, that they would have a safety system, they would save lives, they try to make sure the interstate, all the local highways were safe. But they also, those 5 or 6 states also said, our infrastructure condition is critical to us. And no matter what we do, we're going to make sure that it stays in good condition. So here's what Uncle Sam wants to do. Maintain the highway infrastructure asset system in a state of good repair. The Secretary and Congress has come back and said, how much of the United States, or the interstate, a state of good repair? And my comment was, define state of good repair. Is this someplace above terrible, or is it acceptable? What is that state of good repair? Georgia has asked, other states have asked, what is that state of good repair? Hopefully we'll get there sometime, but not right now. The other thing that Congress did, and I joke around a little bit about this, they actually codified, put it in law, definition for asset management. They probably had at least 50 people in the room and everyone got one word. So they built this thing, but I like part of it. It needs to be strategic, systematic. Have a systematic plan. What are you trying to do out there? It's really about the physical assets. So I'm not talking about saving lives right now, and I'm not talking about the environment and quality of life. I'm saying what's in my asset management plan, it's about the physical assets, pavement and bridges. It needs to have engineering and economic analysis. What's it cost us? What's the return on investment that we're getting out of it? You need to identify a structured sequence of maintenance, preservation, repair, rehab, rehabilitation. The word preservation shows up for the first time in more than 100 years. And it shows up a lot. It's saying that we're supposed to be taking care of the system. A little bit different than maintenance, which might be more reactive. Preservation is a proactive one. Maintenance takes care of the pothole and the crack. Preservation tries to keep you from ever having a pothole or a crack. And you need to do it all so you can achieve and sustain a desired state of repair. So each state has to do it. It has to be risk-based. I'll talk just briefly about the risk-based part of it is, look at the entire interstate here in Georgia and figure out where is the system most at risk and what's the cause of that risk. And I think we as engineers, planners, designers, we can take a look at it and say, well, maybe it's the risk that we don't have any more quality aggregate, or maybe sustainability and air quality is a big issue, and we're not going to have cement anymore. We're going to stop making cement because it pollutes the air. Or maybe the rising seawater along the shoreline is going to inundate all those roads. So what are those systematic risks to the system? We're going to talk about that. One of the states more recently said, well, you know, we're not seeing a lot of young men and women coming out of our local universities that want to go into the highway field. There's another risk that we don't plan on. You know, when I was around, there were a lot of civil engineers coming out. We had a lot of choices of where to go, but now there are not that many kids coming through the system. So state DOTs are looking for a different breed of cat. We're not always building those signature bridges and buildings, but now we have to operate and maintain it, so there might be a different group out there. It says US DOT is required to issue a regulation, which means we take what's in the law and we issue regulations not later than 18 months after the bill was passed. That's sort of Government 101, if it's been a long time since you've been in that class. But what I read here was, when it says US DOT, that means the secretary is going to tell Butch to get this done in 18 months, and that's what I'm sort of charged with doing. Because I need to issue these rules very soon, and I'm working, and my staff is working on get the rule out, tell people what they have to do. We have to develop a process, we have to recertify it every 4 years. It needs to be compatible with the Highway Safety Improvement Program, CMAQ, which has to do with air quality, free. You know, it's just not about the assets, there's other things that are involved. It needs to lead to what I call a program of projects. We don't just collect the data to have fun, or to report to the Federal Highway Administration or US DOT or Congress, but we actually should develop a program of projects that are going to keep the pavement, bridges, in a state of good repair. You're encouraged to have other assets, but for the most part, I'm asking state DOTs, let's focus on pavement and bridges. That's 80% of our investment, is right there in roads and bridges. We had a meeting a couple years ago with 20 different state DOTs, and we said, if you're really comfortable with your pavement and bridges, what would be your next asset to take a look at? Some of them said pavement markings, but I don't know about pavement markings, but we started focusing on high mast lights. High mast lights are incidental to construction when it comes to the interstate. They were built 50 years ago. The only thing we do is change the light bulbs. And when I asked one of the states to go out and just take a look at them and see how they're doing, in that particular state, the first one they went out and looked at, 2 of the 4 bolts were missing, and that afternoon the pole fell down. It was over 250 feet high. Fortunately, it fell down parallel to the roadway. Could have been this way. That particular state took all the high mast lights down that weekend, saying, well, we don't know which ones are safe, which ones are not. They actually had aluminum and copper wiring in there and all those things that you learn in a EE class. They weren't compatible, and that was 50 years ago. We then started looking at overhead signs. You see some of them mounted on the bridge, you see some of them that are gantries over the interstate. Virginia said, we always inspect them, those are our bridge office. They take care of them all the time. In fact, when we went and talked to VDOT, traffic engineering is responsible for what's on the sign, and they're not engineers more often than not, and they don't look to see if the sign's gonna be there tomorrow, they look to see, does it say what it's supposed to say? Within about a month, Virginia lost 3 overhead signs. One cantilever that hit a pickup truck, the driver walked away, 2 of them fell down late at night. Could have been in the middle of rush hour. So now some states are saying, you know, we really need to look at overhead signs. Some states are taking all of the signs off of their bridges because they're concealed and you can't see the bolts in behind, and the bolts are pulling out. They've been there for 50 years. So they pull out and they pull out. So what are those critical assets, and how can you help them do that? So Congress said you need to have a plan. It's going to be systematic, strategic. You need to have this complete inventory. You need to have objectives and measures. Come up with that performance gap that I talked about. Where do you want it to be? Where are you at today? You need to do life cycle cost, and this is a very controversial component of what I'm working on. This life cycle cost is that whole life. What does it cost me once I built that bridge or that roadway? What is it going to cost me this year, next year, or next year? I recently met with 42 state chiefs of maintenance, and they said, we just get the money from front office and we spend it to try to do things left or right, whatever it takes. And I said, here's an opportunity for you to document, risk-based, data-driven, go back to your legislature and say, this is what it actually is going to cost me to keep the road in a good state of repair for the next 5 years or 10 years or 12 years. Here's some hard, fast dollars. It's going to cost me $400 million. If you only give me $300 million, this is where my roads are going to go. Or this is how I'm going to selectively choose on the roads. And so then they walked away saying, that's a different way of doing it. We only reacted when we got the money. Now here's a chance for them to tell their story. Here's that word risk again. What risk to the system, not risk to the project. What's the risk to the system? A financial plan. What happens if I only get 300 million, or 30 million, or 10 million? What's the consequence? What's the trade-off? And then this last one says investment strategies. Do I spend all the money to make sure the roads are in good condition? Do I dump a lot of money on the bridges? How do I put money in the safety activities? What are those strategies, either down the silo or across the silo? Some states actually have jurisdiction, like Delaware, oversees all the transit operators in the state of Delaware. So they have to weigh pavements and bridges and the transit operation. How does that money get split around? What are those investment strategies? And again, preservation shows up. This is some gibberish that you don't need to worry about. State DOT needs to worry about it, but it says that we need to do these rules and get them out on the street pretty soon. And I'll talk about just that at the end. So today, what are we doing? 10 or 12 states have a basic component of asset management out there already, and that's good. But many of them don't have any idea about life cycle costs. When I talk to them, they say, well, we did life cycle when we decided to build it out of concrete or asphalt or a steel bridge or concrete bridge. And I said, no, we're looking at the whole life. So document what it's going to take me to keep the road in a good condition year after year. Meeting with the 42 states, 5 of the states in that room said that on a segment by segment basis, be it 500 feet long or a mile long, they actually have a work plan to keep it in good condition year after year after year. That's pretty rare. You know, I don't know how they did that. I need to go up there and talk to them to see if we can't find a best practice so we can talk to other people about it. But basically, for every segment of the road, they have a plan. And that, like I said, is really, really rare. I looked at those several states, 5 that we saw a long time ago. The key to their success today is that there was some sort of an executive champion. Sometimes, state of Utah, it actually was a district engineer that was out like Bend, Oregon, who was looking at his bridges and tried to say, I got all these bridges and I can't figure out which one to work on next, so I work on the worst one. And when he figured out that that wasn't cost effective, that he needed to work on all of them to keep them all in a certain state of repair, he then got cited as being best in class, best in show. And so he's been that sort of that underground champion to make it work. In Utah, the district engineer started it again in his district, saying, I don't have enough money, I need to figure out what are my assets doing, which one do I need to change? In other states, it's been somebody that's in the front office. The state of New York recently created an asset management office. It took a former head of maintenance and operations, made him the director, and within 2 years, they have a very robust system online. It's getting better every day. They probably still just have pavement and bridges in it, but they are working diligently to try to have that. And we're going to showcase their asset management plan on our website as one of those that's quite different from one in Minnesota and one in Louisiana. Strategic goal of keeping good roads good. Those 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 states that are doing that, that's one of their top criteria. Number 4 might be that we're going to continue to expand and improve mobility. But the bottom line is that they're going to try to keep our good roads good. Levels of service need to be well defined. We don't really know where that international roughness IRI is, what they call it, cracking and rutting. Those are what the public see. But as an engineer, what makes me feel comfortable that the pavement is in good condition? Is it a remaining service life? Is it, what happens if I make it really, really smooth, because I can do that, but it's 65 years old and the concrete is deteriorated so there's just aggregate down there. It's happened in many states, Missouri, Wyoming, parts of Nebraska. The road is gone. It's got something on the surface. And I remember one of the chief engineers saying, it's sort of like putting a Band-Aid over this sore on my arm, only to discover later on that it was cancer. I got a lot of really neat Band-Aids on my arm, but underneath it's gone. So we need to be able to think more than just what the public sees on the surface. How do we do that? Look for some scenario planning. Again, many states are doing it. Changing that culture. It used to be that we build highways. Today we provide critical services. At lunchtime, again, I mentioned that I was in Iowa a couple weeks ago, and I met with the Secretary of the State DOT and the head of their research institute at Iowa State. 95% of the soybeans and corn in the state of Iowa is exported. And I thought, oh, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois. They said, no, we're exporting it outside the United States. So a farmer will call saying, I can't get the truck out of my field onto your road, and the road isn't in good enough condition for me to just in time deliver my product to the port or to the rail or wherever it's going. So it's a service provider. The farmer doesn't care if we're building roads or not. He just wants his road in a state of good repair. And that's what we're talking about. Few states do multimodal. We're not there yet. We're quite a ways behind everybody else. Pavement and bridges is our primary function. Some are looking at culverts, sign structures, high mast lights, etc. 1 or 2, some time ago in North Dakota, I think, called me and said, would you consider our buildings, like all of our maintenance facilities, are those assets? What about all our equipment? Is that an asset? You're learning. That's what I can tell you. Today, PPPs, that's a growing activity. When we see those public-private partnerships, they're taking over some of our roadway systems. They're already doing asset management. They're in it for a profit. They need to make sure that the road is in good condition or people aren't going to drive there. I was on the Illinois toll road the other day. If the road is not in a state of good repair and serviceable, those trucks will find a different road, and they'll find it right away. Because they're not going to be paying if the road is not in good condition. So when I go talk to them, they may not call it asset management, but they have managed assets, and they're taking care of them in a different way than we as road builders have done. Those performance-based maintenance contracts, probably doing about 12,000 kilometers in the U.S. About 5 or 6 states are involved in doing that. They typically are 30 to 70-year contracts. That's sort of strange for me. That's taking a big chance on a lot of different things going on. But the asset management they do, they've agreed to a residual value, what's going to be worth at the end of the time when I turn it back over to the state. Surprisingly, almost all those companies are international. They're not necessarily U.S. Other modes, transit, they also were told to have a new asset management plan or formulate one. And it's funny, in my old job as a chief engineer for federal lands, I bought 10 or 15 buses for a park out in the west, And the following year, they couldn't tell me where all the buses were. I thought, well, that was a basic flaw in the asset management plan. They don't even know where the buses are. They just said, well, they came and we used them. And nobody seemed to have, but actually the chief of maintenance knew where they all were. So I felt better, but the front office said, no, where they're at. So they weren't using them for any decisions. Aviation, strangely enough, I helped co-write a paper on how to do asset management for airports. Here at Hartsfield, one of the gentlemen that I work with at Hartsfield International said that they have about a $9 billion investment inside the fence. They spend about $40 million a year keeping things inside the fence in good condition. Well, I don't know how that figures. And he says, and of that $40 million, a vast majority of it goes to the runway. And I asked, well, what about the building? And he says, well, if the runway isn't in good condition, planes don't land. If planes don't land, I don't need the building. If I have a leak in the building, then I can just go to United or Delta and say, we've got a leak in the building, I need some help. So the lady at Dallas-Fort Worth said, well, you're talking about 5-gallon buckets. And I thought, oh, you mean different buckets of money? And she says, no, I have a lot of 5-gallon buckets because I have a lot of leaks. And recently I came through Seattle and I see these potted plants all around and I looked and they're all 5-gallon buckets. So Seattle has the same problem. So I think, different than being a builder, there's lots of opportunity for moving on and helping them gather all that data and using the data. If you don't, that's a problem. Heavy rail, Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, they got it. They started about 15 years ago. I think Burlington Northern told us that after they did their initial inventory, they found 4,500 miles of rail that hadn't seen another car on it in more than 10 years. So you just gave them away, changed them to rails and trails or bike trails or whatever that program is. But they said 4,500 miles that never saw another rail car in more than 10 years. Let's just get rid of it. So they did. And now when they expand the system, their board of directors says, how's the rest of the rail doing before you build anything new? Before you buy another locomotive, how are the other 30 doing? If one of those is bad, let's get it fixed. And then we'll think about expansion. So they're using it in a much more proactive way. So, adaptation, I'll quickly go through these because I'd like to finish up. Adaptation, that's another piece of the risk, and you need to learn about that too. When we've looked at pavement inventory and bridge inventory, a simple known fact is that we never collected elevation data. We've gone out and looked at the pavement, we know we're standing on the middle of the road, and it's above that ditch line and it's below this cut slope, but we never really thought about what's the elevation. Well, when we have rising sea level or extreme weather events and more water, wouldn't it make sense that we know what the elevation is so we could make some long-range decision? So as we turned on the equipment that already was out there, we've started collecting elevation data, and we've decided that there are some low spots that we can take care of in the next sequence of events out there. But what are those events and how are they going to happen? We've talked about maybe rises in the temperature, and maybe the people in North Dakota need to worry about high temperatures, but people in Arizona are already doing it. So just borrow the manual from Arizona and you can build roads in North Dakota. Simple as that. Those types of activities are out there. What about bridges? Those bridges along I-10 down in Louisiana, we never thought that a bridge would float off of its support. We never envisioned the 25 tidal surge, lifting them all up. So then we started talking about 5 R's I got in here, I think. These are the people that are normally involved with this. The White House Council for Environmental Quality and National Academy of Science. We've got some pilots. I just want to get to this slide where it says there are different options that we could have when it comes to asset management. We could restore the facility. If it gets destroyed, we'll just rebuild another. We could make it a sturdier one, and that's, no offense if the Corps is in the room, but Corps engineers figures that they can outfool Mother Nature, and they'll build it bigger and better. And you can see that in New Orleans. They spent $14.4 billion to protect the lowlands and the east side of New Orleans. But Mother Nature is going to have a bigger storm and a faster storm and a bigger tidal surge the next time, but that's okay. But maybe the option is to move the road someplace else. Or maybe make it so that we can rebuild it very rapidly? Could we make the DOT more resilient so that when the storm hits, that they're out there fixing it right away? When an earthquake occurred up in the St. Louis area, nobody had to call and ask the state DOT to go out and inspect a whole series of bridges that are subject to earthquake seismic activities in Missouri. They knew right away to go out there and do that and take immediate action. Very resilient. State DOTs are that. Sometimes the only solution is a robust situation, and we can make those types of deals. But more often than not, it's a local decision that has to be made, and hopefully not one that comes from the Washington office. We have national studies that are being done. Internationally, everybody is looking at climate change, and I explained earlier, climate change to me is that global thing. We're all going to worry about greenhouse gases and carbon footprint, but adaptation is, I already have an existing facility. What am I doing because it's underwater? Interstate 29 in Iowa. They never planned on it being underwater for 6 months. They didn't mind it being underwater, but that's usually a day or two. 6 months it was underwater. How are we going to do that? Because that's probably going to happen again. Same thing could be in Louisiana or Texas. Could be along the West Coast someplace. So, closing remarks on the asset management. This is how we need to do our business today. We really do need to take account and do what assets do we own, what condition are they in, what's the level of service that we desire to have. We need to plan on preserving them and getting the most out of them. Just like I try to do with my car, you know. When I got out of college back in the day, I thought, you know, I want to get a new car every 2 years. You know, I probably won't like the color, you know, and I'll change. Or maybe the air gets stale in the tires. Or whatever the case might be, I'll change, but not anymore. I think we're all going to do keeping that longer. So as you build a new office building, a new classroom building, what's it going to take to make this thing stay here for 25, 30, 40 years more? Still is on pavement and bridges. We're going to do that because that's where the money is. Others assets will be added, state by state by state, or local government. Certainly it has a home at the local level. When I met with county engineers, National Association of County Engineers and American Public Works Group, they all get it. Because when that county engineer gets $1, he's got to figure out which asset am I going to take care of. And he's got a pretty good picture of where all those assets are and where is he going to go to it next. So my rule is in its final draft. It should be in the Federal Register in the fall. State DOTs will have 60 days to comment on it. I think I've done my homework with my staff, and I don't think I'll get any comments. I tell everybody, so hopefully we don't get any comments from Georgia other than it takes more than 60 days. But other rules that we talk about, we figure are very controversial, will take 90 days to comment on. And we can extend that to 120 days. But I think everybody gets the idea of asset management. Might be some questions, clarification, and then we'll work on that. It's closely linked to planning and performance. Infrastructure performance, and this is the last one. The focus, again, this is a little different than asset management, but it leads from the asset management piece. The focus is still on pavement and bridges. Secretary, Congress has said define a methodology to assess the condition of the pavements. So if we go out here and we look at 75, 85 out here, how would be best, what's the best way to describe physical condition of the pavement? And I went to TTI, the Texas Transportation Institute, a variety of other universities, and I've asked them, how would you do it? And for as many universities and as many research institutes, I got that many different answers. No one does it the same way. It's probably a little bit about who was the oldest engineer in the department and what did he think when he came through the system, because it had some roots way back when that nobody else can figure out. But we need to have a common way of doing that. I say move beyond the IRI. You heard me describe Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. That's pretty common. But yet Congress is saying, tell me what the condition of the interstate is. And if I go in and tell them that I got 3 states doing it 3 different ways, or 50 states doing it 50 different ways, they're going to lower the boom on somebody. So I'm keeping them at bay as best I can. I'm hoping that we can describe good, fair, and poor. I'm suggesting something, I originally said a composite. If you're in school, a composite is when you take A plus B plus C and you have some K factor with each one of them, and you add them up, and magically, pavements ought to be 65. And I used to do that, And even my wife would say, what kind of 65? Why isn't it 62 or 68? So I finally agreed that that's probably not good. So I'm just trying to say, how many miles of the interstate are in good condition, and how many are in fair, and how many are in poor? So that you can go home and you can say, I drove on a good piece of highway today, and your neighbor will say, that was pretty good. So we all have that same common language. So we call it a matrix. It will involve smoothness, rutting, cracking, faulting, but it'll be in a different context of how we do that to try to describe, is the pavement good, fair, or poor? It's not without controversy. That's why this one will take a lot longer. Do we sample it? Do we just, as we do now, we sample so many miles and we say this equates to all of Georgia? We have directional issues. Is it only north and south, or is it east and west? How do I compare the 2-lane road in Nebraska with the 14 lanes that I see out here? If I only collect one lane, how does that equate? And I have to report that to Congress, and they haven't figured it out, and it's always best if I propose something rather than them tell me how to do it, because they'll probably say, well, collect it in the 3rd lane, and not tell me where the 3rd lane starts. VMT is the volume, or is it lane miles, or is it center line miles? Those are all different answers that I've got to, we, the state DOTs and us, have got to resolve. We have issues like standard methods. Nobody does it the same. Standard segments. Some states do it on a mile basis. Some states do it every 526 feet. Some states even do it less. The actual equipment measures it in every 10 feet or so. So the data is already collected. We reported in 526-foot pieces of it, 1/10 of a mile. But some states don't do it that way. So how do we do that? Concept of a calibration center. If I brought the equipment from South Carolina down here to Georgia and ran it all over the Georgia roads, would I get the same numbers that Georgia gets? Or would I get a different set of numbers? Is it the equipment that's different? Might be the operator. Maybe one likes to drive at 50 miles an hour and the other one drives at 70. Are the numbers different? Standard analysis tools. Every manufacturer does it differently. Nothing new. But we report one number to Congress. And I haven't told them that there are lots of different ways of calculating it. So they are asking me, why does Georgia say their roads are in good condition? I think in Georgia, we're standing in Georgia. Versus South Carolina, they're saying, well, South Carolina, we drove on their roads, they're better. It's like 2 different analysis tools. Typical one I put down here, standard equipment. We're looking at ruts, rut and pavements. Some devices just use 3 laser points, some have 5, some have 7. James here is using LiDAR. He can even do it better than anybody else. I don't have a terabyte of computer space on my laptop, so I can't use all of that data. But, where's the standards? That one, the draft MPR, is coming out in the springtime, and the final rule sometime in 2014. This is probably the only slide that's really important, and it lists the FHWA asset management website. If you have questions about asset management and where states are going and who's doing what, I think it's a pretty good reference. It's referenced by TRB, National Academy of Science, AASHTO. They all sort of use the website to try to figure out what's going on in asset management and where are we going from there. So it wasn't all those slides in one period of time, but take any questions if you have anything.
Yeah, any questions?
Thank you very much for that presentation. So there are lots of definitions of performance management
Yes.
and asset management.
Yes.
And so could you talk a little bit about how you see both coming together to advance infrastructure management?
Very good, very good. Congress, in their wise way, crafted the early part of the legislation saying you need to have asset management. You need to know what assets you have, what conditions they're in. And that develops a program of projects, as you saw. In the long run, the program of projects should be, in part, to make sure the roads and bridges are in a state of good repair. So that's the performance end of it on the other side of it. There are other things that are going through the safety program, where we have a highway safety improvement program, which also leads to a program of projects. But ultimately, that program of projects should reduce the number of fatalities or serious injuries. So here we have these management tools helping us make sure the system is safe, make sure that it's dependable, making sure that it's reliable for whatever these issues are. And Congress has said, establish some performance measures on that side so that we can see what the effect is. So if you're spending $30 million a year in safety, show us that you're effectively driving the number of fatalities down. The problem on the safety side is that they not only have to drive fatalities down, but serious injuries. And if we can't define what we're doing on pavements, we really can't define what serious injuries are. So that rule will come out this fall, and there'll be lots of questions about what's a serious injury. Is it when a bone is broke, or is it when you're extracted from the car? What's a serious injury? So they too we're spending a lot of money on safety, and then ultimately we should see a reduction in the number of fatalities. So that's the performance side. To me, the performance side is more global within the state DOT. Do I have a safe system in the state DOT? Do I have a reliable system in the state DOT? Do I have am I reducing congestion and improving air quality in the state? Those are those bigger performance things. Here's that asset management piece. Here's the safety management piece. Here's the congestion management. Those are the fundamental pieces that we have to use to be able to make those decisions. Because there's no way that a state could come in and say that my interstate is doing really good, and then I'd be the one to challenge them and say, you don't even know how much interstate you have. You can't tell me how many lane miles, center lane miles, and I know that that's the case, because we ask those questions. In fact, the states have been since 1970 reporting interstate data to us. The most recent data is 2011. I tried to do a profile on I-85, north and south. Half of the data in the states was missing. And yet they certified that I have all the data. So what number am I using? So if you don't have the asset, I really don't believe the number of performances. Okay? Other questions?
Yes, thank you very much. You just mentioned that it's very hard to sell the asset management concept to the state DOTs. Also, in most state DOT, they cannot incorporate the data into the decision-making process. So I'm just curious, what major reason? It's just because of organizational issue or technical issue?
I think it's a cultural issue within the DOT.
Okay.
I think that it's getting them to go from a highway construction agency or a building agency to a service provider that now has to take care of those assets. The building owner of this building has to manage the building. Whatever company built the building, that was their job, and now it's over to the other side. State DOT is uniquely different in that they basically design it, build it, operate, own it, maintain it. And so it's a cultural shift, I think, and that the states that are starting to embark on asset management have realized that it's not maintenance like in the district office. This is a corporate level decision in the front office, the highest offices of the state DOT, saying we're going to take care of our system. And we're not going to cut the maintenance budget every time that we need a nickel. We're going to weigh decisions that if we're going to widen this road or extend this road, how are we going to do that? And where's that money going to come from? So there are some states, and I'd say more than a handful, I'd say probably half, are still in that old sector of saying, we're just building roads. That's our job. If I go into their offices, I can see all the designers and they're doing their job. And maintenance is somebody else. I don't know where they're at. Well, it's not really just maintenance. It's really lots of decisions about taking care of the system. That's what it works.
So because you just mentioned a lot of remaining issue, for example, how to define the performance.
Yes.
So do you think that that's one of the reasons that the state DOT is very hard for them to set the goal? So what's the goal to achieve? Because they don't have a standard performance measure.
Well, that's probably part of the reason for the federal rule to come out, is to suggest that in the case of the interstate, which is a performance measure, I've looked at suggesting that no more than 10% of the interstate can be in poor condition. So one, I've got to define what poor is. And two, how do you do that? And so I've come up with this matrix idea to say that for every segment of the roadway, look at smoothness and tell me if it's a good, fair, or poor. If it's poor, put the check in the box. And let's look at rutting. And if the rutting is poor, check the box. We'll then say that that segment is poor. If 2 out of 3 are poor, then it's poor. If only one of them is poor, then I'll say it's fair. But no more than 10% of all the interstate can be in poor condition. So I'm going to try to set that threshold and define what that is. But when I just looked at smoothness and I looked at the 2011 data, 27 states failed the criteria. I would not, I'd disconnect my phone, that wouldn't work very well. They'd all be called. So I started saying, well, what about smoothness and rutting? And I combined where states had sent the data in, not all of it did, but if I just looked at those two, suddenly we were only talking about 5 states had more than 10% of the roads in poor condition. So that meant that they had poor smoothness and excessive rutting. And so then they fell out, and that was down to 5 states. And I talked to those 5 states, and they all agreed that they, more than 10% of their roads in pretty bad shape. They don't like that, and Congress will then direct them to spend more money to try to change the numbers. I don't like that telling them how to do it, because I think the state ought to be able to maintain that option on their own, but that's the cause and effect. They will, performance is a new way of doing business. It's not the highway department of our grandparents, it's a new highway department, and they're gonna have to take a different approach.
Thank you.
Talking about funding, so appropriations is a very political issue, especially on the federal level with formulas and everything, and even the Wyoming example that you were giving, there's a formula. How do you reconcile the very rational process of asset management in the political context? Is it just running out of money? Is it that asset management is housed at the local level? How do you reconcile that?
Another great question. The states that have been really effective use the data to drive the political decisions. So in Utah, when about twice a year, I believe, the Transportation Committee within the Utah legislature meets with the senior executives of the Utah DOT, and they look to say, where did you make investments based on last year's funding? And they showed them. And when they saw those local roads starting to go downhill very rapidly, the state said, the governor, the legislature said, what can you do about this? We don't have any more money, what can you do? And the state said, give us a little bit of time, and they figured out that maybe the bar was too high on the interstate, so they took the money and put it over there. The legislature is happy. They made it work without any more money. Now, in another state, the legislature probably just thinks the roads are there. They don't know why we're there. And so I don't think that data-driven decision-making stuff has got to their level. And one of the state just north of you in Tennessee, I met with the director and the chief engineer. They have 4 districts. He told me one day in a big forum that, yeah, he gets pavement data, he gets bridge data, and he gets safety data. And he says, but the state pays me a lot of money, and I'm the decision maker. I'm essentially the black box. I thought, well, that's good. I finally met the black box. And he's making all the decisions, and he says, my decisions are based on a big P. Big P, is that pavements? He says, no, that's political pressure. I have to make sure each one of my politicians is happy. Last year I was up there, and he says, I've been driving across the state, and I found 2 of my districts, all the roads and bridges are really, really, really good. And 2 of them are pretty pathetic, and those 2 congressmen are on my case. And he says, I got out all the data, and I'm looking at the data, and he says, so I went in and I told them, the data says this, this, and this is happening. Give me the freedom to move some of the money around, and I'll make it happen. I don't want to penalize the guys that are doing good, but I need to make differences over here. So he too changed the level of what he was working on, and now he's starting to make inroads on the other side. So it's making it data-driven, show them where the risk is, and it'll take time. It's not your neighbors to the south. He come in and he says, I'd like to have an asset management plan on board by Monday. Can we do that? Can you help? Throw me some more resources. It's like, no, it's going to take you years. You're not going to do it tomorrow. But he's already starting those inferences down in Florida, and they're working with the legislature, finding, again, that 1 or 2 champions that are in the DOT that understand. And I know here in the state it's very political, and the way the commission works and things like that, the 12 or 13 jurisdictions, they all want their equal part of the share of the pot. We'll just have to keep working with them and showing them that the data is there to support what we're trying to do. So it'll just take some big governments made out. Oh, one in the back.
Sorry. Yeah, you talked about bridge management systems and pavement management systems from the 1990s.
Yeah.
And I think it was IC that required those systems initially, and then that requirement was removed. So my question is there any concern that with MAP 21 expiring after a short period of time, you know, some of these requirements are gonna go away or change, and how's that gonna play out?
At least from my point of view, I think the concept of the asset management plan and performance plan are just outstanding business activities. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in highway departments today is we see more business people being in the front office. In years past, it was just an old maintenance guy that worked his way all the way up, and he was still the chief engineer, and he now is the secretary. But I think in more and more, we're getting that front office almost like a corporation. They've got a business to run, and they need to be able to make that happen. So whether I'm out here trying to sell asset management or performance management, or Congress is saying it's going to be here for 2 years, I think the same thing that happened in the ICT legislation, where you would have the 6 mandated management systems, bridge and safety and pavement. And yes, by 97, Congress threw it back out because the state said it was an unfunded mandate. But I just showed you a slide. I think 47 states actually have legitimate, everyday pavement management systems. I wouldn't say that they're all using them properly, but they all have it. And the same thing with bridge. They all have some sort of a bridge. You know, we might have needed the legislation to get them going, but then after a while they said, you know, this is what we need to do. So I think what Federal Highway and DOT and the state DOTs are looking at is we got a 5-year plan, we got 2 years of funding, some semblance of performance management, asset management are going to continue it. They may tweak it a little bit, but I think we're going to see that it's a sound business practice. And we need to know what assets do we have. The governor ought to be able to say, this is the value of my transportation system in the state of Georgia or South Carolina or Nebraska or wherever, and I think that's going to be critical because there isn't enough money to go around. And if they've got to weigh highways versus healthcare or education, we're in the best position. We know what we have. And so I just think we need to be documented, make it data-driven, show them where they're at risk, and then make those decisions and move forward. So I don't think it'll go away.
This is very close to the end. Is there a quick question?
I'll ask one. Hopefully, I don't know if it's quick, but I just want to go a little off track. And one other asset that hasn't gone much is people, and that people are your asset. And if you look at, there was an article in the paper just the other day that for a lot of the federal agencies, in the next just few years, 30 to 40% of the people are eligible to retire. And I'm curious what you think and how you see that as what are these agencies going to look like in a few years down the road? And also, what does it mean to these guys? And sort of career advice on, here's the world you're going to enter and how it's different from the one we've been telling you about. So that's not quick.
No, but I've seen that coming, and it's interesting that one of my consultants that's been working with us for a couple of years, actually when we asked him to identify in that airport scenario, what were the assets on the airport system and the owner at our Hartsfield and Dallas-Fort Worth, he identified the people and those resources as being assets, and we found that surprising, but it was like a wake-up call. And then he also said the data is another asset. It's funny, within the US DOT in Washington, D.C., when we got a new office building built in 2006, 2007, the IT servers and the IT equipment was sort of an afterthought. And when they realized that it would dim the lights in our building, they moved the IT system about 40 miles away into a warehouse because our building was not designed to have all those computers running and servers out there and all that. And only in recent times, like in the last 2 or 3 months, have they started migrating all that stuff back there. When they also came into the building, they miscounted the number of employees, And so they lopped 3 floors off of our building. So instead of a 10-story and 11-story building, we have an 8 and a 9-story building. So we got a little cramped in there for a while, and they said, well, with attrition, we just won't worry about it. But now we're realizing that while we may not have designers doing design, there are lots of other things that we're working on. And we don't honestly know much about asset management. We're trying to gather that information. State DOTs are downsizing. We're not in that building arena. I don't think that's going to go away because the system is aging. It's 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. We're probably not going to see all that rapid expansion that we saw. But what we need to do is figure out how would you, maybe as one of James's classes, how would you rebuild 75, 85 downtown? Maintain traffic while you're at it. Make sure you don't get any phone calls late at night saying, I got delayed or I got stuck out there. It's going to happen. How are we going to do that? What's the options out there? What happens if you're in Denver and, like they did a few years ago, decide to rebuild the interstate and put light rail down the middle of it? I have a 2.5-hour commute every day in the morning, driving to and from the office, and they want to talk about putting light rail down the middle of the interstate. Not on my watch. That's me. What are you guys going to do? I'll try to find another way. So the challenges are going to be different. They're going to be unique. You're going to have to be resilient. You're going to have to figure out, how can I replace a bridge over the weekend? You're seeing that. You read about it in ASC, Engineering News Record. I have a team that goes out there to help state DOTs do that. Some states said never going to happen. Well, we've already got 10 states that are sliding bridges in place. And the press wants to go out and see the bridge fall down. We slide the bridge in over the weekend and they say, how come you didn't do this 10 years ago? You must all be dumb. You know, you should have done this a long time ago. You need to help us figure out how to put that bridge in tomorrow. Golden Gate Bridge, significant structure in the Golden Gate. We've maintained it for a long, long time. There's another bridge, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Our administrator came in and said, if it's fracture critical, because that's one of those bad words the press loves, if it's fracture critical means that it could fall down like the I-5 bridge in Washington. He suggested to us, get rid of all the fracture critical bridges in the United States. Can we do that in 10 years? Golden Gate, Verrazano Narrows, GW. I'm sure there are bridges in this state that are fracture critical. No, that's a practical way of building that bridge. It's probably the only way to build that bridge. This coming weekend, we're going to slide the new bridge into place north of Seattle. It's 4 lanes wide, 160 feet long. We'll build it right beside the older bridge. We're going to slide it in over the weekend. It'll be really neat. Hopefully my office will get the film on it and we can put it on YouTube. Sort of a different thing for me. We're going to put it on YouTube, show you how we move the bridge over. But there are a lot of things that went into play in that to move that bridge. To put the Bailey Bridge across it, or Acro Bridge, put that out there, what did it take? Slide the bridge across. Things that we had to worry about that you'd never think about. The Corps didn't want us in the water, pulling the old bridge out because it was environmentally sensitive. So we had to have one secretary talk to another secretary saying, you got 70,000 vehicles a day on that bridge. Give us a little slack. So we were able to get in there with divers, get all the old bridge out of the way, put the temporary bridge in, slide the new ones in. That's innovation, and I need innovation. We need innovation. State DOTs need new ideas. How are we going to rebuild 75? How are we going to get more people to and from wherever they are? How are we going to maintain that quality of life?
I think as earlier I mentioned to Butch before he came into the talk, that not only talking about infrastructure management, I think I asked him to say, well, share his experience as well as bringing not only the solution but also the challenge. Because I told him, say, our student is going to graduate soon, and not only the textbook stuff, but what they're going to face in the market, and because this is a changing world. So I think I'm very pleased, and then thank you very much for giving a talk, not only historical view of infrastructure management, what's changed, as well as the insight of assets management, along with all the not only the solution but challenging you guys going to face, the innovation you guys can have. There's a huge amount of opportunity. So with that, thank you very much. So we'll start here then. Thanks.